And he's like, oh, and he went and jumped up and sat next to Lisa. I'm like, oh, not good. No.
Yeah. That was a dating fell, right?
Yeah. And and by about 5 minutes later, Josh is leaning against her arm as she's just touching his back lightly. And within 30 minutes, he's like laying on her lap, almost asleep as she's running her fingers through his hair. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I'm just, friendship is all I'm interested in. Like, Josh, you're not helping me here, buddy.
You got quite the wingman there, a 5-year-old wingman. It's great.
Yeah, he was actually, he's gold. Yeah.
Welcome to Along the Way. I'm John Matarazzo, your host and fellow traveler. Thank you for joining me along my way as I try to become more like Jesus every day. The goal of Along the Way is to identify the moments in life that Jesus really is walking with us and trying to get our attention. But just like the disciples on the way to Emmaus, we are missing these moments that our hearts are burning within us. I want us to be able to identify these moments, learn from others, and apply these lessons to our lives so that we don't miss the blessings that God has for us along the way in our life journey. Dating is difficult and relationships are hard. So after Mike and Lisa were both tragically widowed, they found themselves thrust into the dating scene, needing to navigate it with all the modern challenges, and this time with their kids. The story of their building this blended family reminds me of the Brady Bunch, but with Jesus firmly at the center. In this episode, you're going to hear Mike and Lisa Kunz's relationship journey and how their quest became their calling to help others on their own dating discovery. I'll get to our conversation in just a moment, but I want to thank you for listening to Along the Way. All of my episodes and social links are available on my website, alongtheway.media. You can also join my email list to get updates right in your inbox. All of the links from this episode will be in the show notes. And now, here's my conversation with Mike and Lisa Kunz. Well, Michael and Lisa Kunz, it is great to have you on Along the Way. Thanks so much for being here. We connected a couple weeks ago through a mutual friend. You guys have a tremendous ministry that we're going to talk about. And a mutual friend connected us because of the ministry that you guys have. It's the dating discovery. And I'm on my own dating journey. I'm still single. I'm 37. And I am praying that God will bring the future Mrs. John Matarazzo up here at some point. So a friend, Kate, connected us for this Zoom call where you guys shared your amazing story of how God has brought you guys together and how you're helping other people. And so after hearing your story, I was inspired to invite you onto this podcast because it encouraged me. And if it encourages me, it'll encourage everybody that's listening that is in the same position or in the same season of life. And so just welcome to Along the Way. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your journey with Jesus.
Well, thank you for having us today.
Yeah, John, thank you so much. We're honored to be able to have this opportunity. And there was a point in our lives where we didn't think our stories were all that spectacular, but when all the pieces, we started putting them all together, we're like, wow, God's done some amazing stuff. Yes.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I like how you said about the different pieces. You didn't feel like they had much value, or they didn't seem like they were going to be beautiful coming together. But as you're putting a jigsaw puzzle together, you start with the edges, and sometimes you got a whole bunch of blue sky, and it just doesn't seem to really work. But when you put it all together, and God's the one that actually putting those pieces in the right places, you see this beautiful, amazing picture that only the author, the designer of this picture could have ever imagined. And so, yeah, I want to hear your story about how God has led you to kind of what you guys are doing right now. And so explain that part first, kind of the ministry that you guys do, who you guys are, and then we'll go back and tell your stories.
Okay. Well, wow. Yeah, man, the story kind of started in 97 when I got married to my first wife, Deborah, and we were planning on a lifelong love, and I got into construction and building high-end homes, and got busy doing that. And we got busy raising a family, 3 kids. Deborah and I both had grown up in Christian families, and we thought, okay, we know how to do this. We know what it looks like. And I was succeeding financially and taking care of that end. And boy, about 8, 9, 10 years in, Deborah was like, "Hey, there's got to be something more." And I was like, "What's more? I mean, we're doing good. We got 3 kids. We've got a nice home. We're taking care of everything. We're ministering in our church. We're holding small groups." And she started, I don't feel loved. And we both had grown up from very logical, brain-minded backgrounds and not a lot of heart connection. And we started to go on a journey. We heard about some people out in Redding, California, Danny Silk in particular, that had a lot of relationship stuff, advice, and straw. And so we actually, in 2009, we made the move with our family, all 5 of us. We drove across the country and transplanted from North Carolina to Redding, California. And we were here for a few years. We ended up having a 4th child while we were here, which was a surprise, a beautiful surprise. And in that process, and well, the years before that, while we were here, we really went after relationship coaching, books, conferences, everything. And to kind of rewind a moment in here, my whole life, I'd had an addiction to porn and masturbation. It had always occupied a small, controllable section of my life. So in my point of view, it had never gotten out of hand, but it was something that I'm like, hey, I don't want this in my life, but I don't really know what to do about it. And when we moved to Redding, we went to Love After Marriage, which is Nothing Hidden Ministries marriage event here in Redding. And the first thing they asked is, hey, I see you answer this question about porn and masturbation, and you should join the men's group. So another parallel path was joining the men's group and walking into sobriety and then to freedom. And started leading. I've been in there 12 years now, leading a group for 10 of those years. And 6 years ago, Deborah passed away from breast cancer. That was
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that was a difficult, devastating event. I had actually prayed for people and seen them healed. I'd seen a lady healed from breast cancer. And then to see my wife pass away from the very same thing. And I had lots of questions for God and went through a pretty intense process with all of that. And came out the other end, and I was single with 4 kids and started dating and the tension of that. Yeah.
And meantime, I was living a parallel life, not knowing Michael somewhere else. I actually got married to Chris in 1995. And he was an Air Force officer. And so we moved every 12 to 24 months and lived, a really nomadic life. And the truth is that Chris and I didn't necessarily have the emotional tools that we needed for a thriving marriage. We definitely had a surviving functional marriage, but it wasn't necessarily a thriving marriage. And the Lord started really working in my heart in 2012, 13, and really just brought me into this whole encounter of experiencing God in a whole new way through worship and more intimacy with Him. And by 2015, I really was feeling, I had known for years that I felt called to ministry, but I didn't know how I was going to get there. And 6 years ago, I recall being in the shower. I was living in Anchorage, Alaska, and I was in the shower where I have a lot of clarity and fluid thought. And I just thought, Lord, don't let me abort what you've impregnated me with, meaning the dream of being in ministry. I didn't want my own disqualifications, my own insecurities to actually, to get in the way of that. And I didn't know how it was going to happen. And Chris decided to retire. He had some career challenges. He decided to retire, and we ended up in the Sacramento area. And it was the day before, I had said to Chris, I said, I don't know how I'm going to get from point A to point B. Meaning, I don't know how to get where I'm at right now, into ministry. I was looking for jobs in nonprofits and churches and Christian organizations. And I didn't see how it was going to work out. I was trying to help God out. Wasn't that nice of me? I was trying to help him out. And,
we all do that. Try to help God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was trying to help him out. And I said, but the one thing I do know is I'm not supposed to strive. I had the awareness that Jesus is the shepherd, and it's his job to lead us to still waters and green pastures. And I said, so I don't know if it's going to be like another 2 years of training or, this meeting somebody that changes your life in a day. I said, I have no idea. I just know I'm not supposed to strive. And he listened, but he really didn't have much to say about it. And the next day, my life changed incredibly. It was a very traumatic day. And Chris ended his life that day.
Wow.
And without a note, without much warning. And it was pretty traumatic. It wasn't anything that anybody would have ever expected, anybody who knew him. He was a very charismatic, motivating, positive person and military commander who had influenced and inspired hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And so I just moved to this community. I didn't really know anybody, and I felt like the carpet was completely pulled out from underneath me. And I had 2 teenagers at the time. I had a 13-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son. But the Lord had already put it in my heart to actually attend a ministry school here in Redding, California, associated with Bethel Church. And so after the initial shock wore off, I knew that this is where I was going to come. And so started shifting and making plans and ended up moving here the following summer with the kids and got planted, got kind of settled in and started ministry school, and the kids were settled. And in this time frame, I also started dating again, but I chose a different route. I chose online dating.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd been in Redding for a number of years, so I knew quite a few people here. And so I didn't really think of online dating because we have a great church community and lots of singles in the area. So I started dating here, and that was its own unique challenge. I was surprised at how many times I was turned down for a simple lunch invite just to get to know someone better, and after a conversation usually, and about 3/4 of the time. And like, wow. And so after about a year of that, I was like, I enjoy my 4 kids and the community I already have. I'm just going to stick with that for a while and enjoy being single. And I was also going to Bethel Church where Lisa was going to ministry school, but Bethel Church didn't work as a great connection point for us.
Yeah. So I actually had been dating somebody else, somebody who was living in Colorado at the time. And I had broken up with this person a few times, realizing that we weren't completely on the same page spiritually, and seeing some things that maybe I knew wasn't the best fit for me. But anyway, the 3rd time I broke up, it was the last time. And so, which was about a year after I knew it. And but God was really gracious with me. And I had felt even in that relationship, the Lord has said, if you want this, I will bless it. But if you trust me. And so I ended up breaking up and realizing, out of the place of, I've already given my first yes to Jesus. So anything that competes with that needs to be a no, an easy no.
Yeah.
So I broke that relationship off. And a week later, my daughter, who was 15 at the time, she said, "Hey, Mom, when you're ready to date again, let me know. I have a friend with a good-looking dad."
So, over on the other side of town, after my wife passed away, I structured my life so I could just work during school hours. And then after school, I was with my kids. I'd pick up my youngest, who was, at this time he was in kindergarten, and I'd pick him up, and we would go over to U Prep, which is the high school my kids were going to, and we would go to whatever practice was happening. And so at track practice, I just so happened to be doing slow-mo videos of Kristen and shot put and discus, and there were 3 other girls in her throwing group, and Becca de los Santos was one of those 4 girls, Lisa's daughter. And nothing notable at the time. I just had fun with all 4 of them, my daughter and the other 3, and got to know them. And so apparently that's where I made my impact.
You made your mark.
Yes.
Yeah, his impression. But this was 6 months before she mentioned him.
Yeah.
She said, I actually thought you guys would do really well together, but I didn't say anything because I was in another relationship. And so...
Attention.
I know. Yeah. The scandal, the intrigue. So, yeah. So when she told me that, I actually just kind of shelved it because that wasn't where I was at kind of emotionally. And I was processing some other things. So then it was about a month later, and I was picking her up from school one day, and she was excited about a program that she was accepted into along with some other kids. And it just triggered the thought. I was like, oh, who is that you said had a good looking dad? And
I could have used some validation around this point. And how can I find out these things?
Well, you know,
you had been turned down for a lot of lunches and things like that. I love that your approach was, let me just accept this season and embrace it and just be dad. Like, you changed your life to be the best dad that you could be. And you walked in that calling and that gifting that God had for you, rather than just striving for the next thing.
Yeah. And, even my point was, like, when I was married, I really went after being the best husband that I could be. And I'm like, well, I'm single now, so I'm going to become the best single person that's possible. And each week I would go to acro yoga and I got my physical touch needs met in a safe way with other people, and then salsa dancing on Wednesday nights. And there's a good group of people there. And I was just careful to make sure I danced into someone different with each song so that I wasn't creating any romantic tension anywhere. And mountain biking rides. I'd go to the rock climbing gym 3 times a week with my boys. And man, we just had a really fun, our budget was tight because of my working hours. So we just cut back on our lifestyle and we just had a really full and exciting life.
Wow. Yeah. And I was a busy ministry school student and was trying to manage that and be a single mom. And our paths never crossed. And so I asked Becca that, when I picked her up from school that day, I said, who is that? And she said, oh, that's Kristen. Mom, she has such a nice family. Because she knew that she had an older brother that went to the same school and a younger brother, and she had met her dad. And she goes, and her dad's good looking too. And I kind of looked at her skeptically, like, she goes, no, really? Xana says he's the hottest dad at U Prep. The 15-year-old girl sitting around commenting about who's got hot dads.
Yeah.
Sounds about right for high school.
And we don't ever find that out. So, yeah. Oh, well.
So
years later, I get to discover.
Yeah.
I need to go thank Xana.
There you go. Go give her credit. And she goes, do you want to see a picture? And I said, well, yeah. So she shows me, and I was like, oh, you weren't kidding. So we drive home, and I go in my room with my phone, and I look up on Facebook, because that's the picture she showed me. And I was like, ooh. And none of his stuff, like all of his Facebook settings they're public.
Yeah.
So I felt free.
Totally stalked him.
Yes, thank you, John.
No. We call it pre-search.
Pre-search. Okay.
It's a safety research. Research. Yeah.
I love.
We'll call it that. Okay.
I love her, so I accept that definition.
Yeah.
So I pre-searched him, and I read about 6 months worth of posts and comments, and I was like, wow, he seems like a quality person. He seems like he loves his kids. He's a great dad. He's very involved. He could see the things that he mentioned: acro yoga, mountain biking, salsa dancing, like all these things. He was active, he was fit, and it seemed like he really had loved his late wife passionately, but he was also seemed like ready to date again. And I was like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So the next morning I get up and I go out to the kitchen, and my daughter's sitting at the island and she's having breakfast. And I said, so I checked him out. She's like, uh-huh. Very unemotional. I said, so hook his sister up. And she was like, no, you're on your own. I'm like, what? I said, what do you want me to do? She goes, wait till track season.
This was October.
November. And
track
I'm like,
starts in March.
Yeah, 4 months.
Wow.
And I was like, ooh, 4 months? This is a great quality man. Like, if I wait to even just connect with him to be friends, I'm like, he may be off the market. So
that is a legitimate concern. Yeah,
it is.
She didn't know that I was like, I won't say it was a godly move to stop dating. It was more of a up yours moment, as my heart was burned by all the rejection. I can be honest, not every moment of my life is a godly, beautiful moment.
I didn't know he was on a dating hiatus. And so, any time that somebody experiences a significant life event, right, especially losing somebody so close to you, your perspective of fear and risk shifts. And I was like, you know what? I've got nothing to lose. So I requested to be his friend.
Yeah, over on the other side of town, I had been doing a lot of journaling a lot of my grieving process, and had actually been putting a lot of that publicly on Facebook. And a lot of people were joining in that conversation and getting their own healing through their own grieving. And so I was getting 10 to 20 Facebook requests a day. So when Lisa's came along, I just clicked on it to make sure she wasn't like a bad account or something. And I saw a picture of Becca, and I'm like, oh, this is a U-Prep mom just wanting to check in on who's around her daughter. And
of course, the photo was strategically placed, right? As well as the picture of my cute dog.
But there was no label telling me to notice those things. I accepted the request. I didn't even check to see if she was married or not. I just assumed, yes, of course, she's a married mom. She's just wanting to keep track of who's around her daughter. So I'm cool with that.
And I'm on the other side of town, and I'm like, so a whole week. So he accepts it, right? And I comment on a few of his things, and he likes my comments, and that's it. No indication that he had looked at my profile or anything.
I haven't.
And I'm like, interesting. A beautiful woman requests you to be your friend on Facebook, yet your stuff is completely open. You're not even intrigued? Curious? So I didn't know that he was so popular, right? I had no idea he was so popular. And so I just was like, it was a week later, and I was like, well, I guess I need to work a little harder to get his attention. So as the way they say it now, I slid into his DMs. I sent him a message on Messenger, and just said, let him know how I knew who he was through our daughters, and a little about his story. And that honestly, that I'd lived in Redding for 18 months and I didn't know anybody who had had a similar journey as mine. What I found appealing was that here was somebody who was around my age, who had kids the same age, that went to the same school, that went to the same church, and had a similar life-changing experience within 5 weeks of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Now, I didn't know I knew it was the same year. I didn't know it was that close at the time. And I had friends through ministry school, and they were either significantly younger or around my age, but had never been married or had kids. Mm-hmm. So I actually was really attracted to the idea of having a friend who had gone through something similar and was in the same stage of life.
And there was no romance tied to it.
Oh, I was...
You were open.
I was open, but the idea of friendship was very appealing, right? Somebody to do stuff with and things. And
I totally get that. I totally get that.
Both our families could hang out. So anyway, I just said, hey, if you ever want to get together for coffee or tea and chat, it might be therapeutic for us both.
How about next Tuesday or Friday?
Yeah. So he responded right away for lunch. And I was like, oh, he just upped it from coffee to lunch. And then he also said, here's
what
my...
I didn't tell her is I can't stand coffee.
And he also gave me his phone number, said texting's better than messenger. And I was like, so I totally read into it. I was like, oh, he's up in the bar. This is a good sign.
Facebook Messenger. Texting is way better. Nothing romantic was intended. Oh, ouch. Ladies, if you're listening, men too, you never read in any deeper than the actual words that are being said. Don't read it more into it.
Yeah. So we ended up having lunch the next week, and he surprised me by bringing along Josh, who was 5 at the time.
Yeah, I took Josh to school that morning, and they didn't have school the Friday before Thanksgiving week. So I'm like, oh. So I took him to work with me that morning, and then at lunch, I'm like, oh, I wonder if I should contact her and let her know I've got a buddy with me. Anyway.
No, I adapted. It was totally good. It actually probably made it a little more comfortable because I could talk to Josh. So it was great.
Yeah. We're at this restaurant downtown Reading, and there's a fireplace in this restaurant, and there's one booth right in front of the fireplace. It was the only one empty in the restaurant that day. And so I'm like, God, no, God, this is not, no, God, this isn't good. So Lisa sat down because it was the only empty spot. And I asked Josh, hey, where do you want to sit? You want to sit on the inside of me or the outside of me on the booth seat? And he's like, oh, and he went and jumped up and sat next to Lisa. I'm like, oh, not good. No.
Yeah. That was a dating fell, right?
Yeah. And by about 5 minutes later, Josh is leaning against her arm as she's just touching his back lightly. And within 30 minutes, he's like laying on her lap, almost asleep as she's running her fingers through his hair. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I'm just like, friendship is all I'm interested in. Like, Josh, you're not helping me here, buddy.
You got quite the wingman there, a 5-year-old wingman. It's great.
Yeah, he was actually, he's gold. My police figured that out too. They would take him around whenever he was at games and stuff. But yeah, so we went on several dates through the next month and a half, and
they were friendship. I was in the friend zone
very strongly. And January 1st, we were coming back from Mount Shasta, some ice skating and some pizza with my family. And I'd invited Lisa and her kids along because there had been a lot of back and forth. And as we're driving back, I just started thinking, because see, I don't really catch on really fast to what's going on in my own head and heart. So I was like, hey, Michael, quietly, because she's in the car. Michael, what do you think if someone else asked Lisa out on the date? And I'd be like, I mean, I wouldn't be a big fan, but, it's open territory. So, it's all fair. And I said, what do you think if someone came along and asked Lisa to marry them? And I was like, I don't no, I don't like that. That's not good. And so I finally, and then so the rest of the 30 minutes home from that point, I'm like, okay, so I like her. I'm interested in her, and I'm not interested in someone else walking off with her without at least spending some more time doing some more research. And so that night we got home. We drove up to my house, and I could just see the moon just starting to crest the horizon. So all of us go into the house, and I'm like, hey, Lisa, let's go out. We had a trampoline on the backyard that was kind of sloped up so you could look over the house and see the moonrise. I'm like, hey, let's go see the moonrise.
And I'm like, moonrise? I've heard of sunrise, sunset. I hadn't ever heard of moonrise. I'm like, all right.
Like,
where's this going?
Moon sets, moon rises. What you talking about? I mean, so we went out there. We're watching the moonrise. Yes, we were watching the full moonrise. And I just kind of took a few minutes to recount our story. And at the end, I like, Lisa, I would like to date you with the intention of marrying, with pursuing potential for marriage. And I took full responsibility for that. I didn't ask where she was or what she was thinking. I just said, hey, this is what's my heart. I would like to date you with the intended pursuit of potential marriage. And she sat there for about 2 seconds, and then a big smile,
Yeah. Yeah. And the relationship shifted.
She waited 6 weeks.
Would.
A compliment.
Yeah. His heart was pretty guarded. It had been kind of shut down because,
some dating experiences,
that had been a little funky for him. And so, but it was great. And then the relationship, our process was pretty fast. Having already been married
19 and 20 years.
Yeah, a long time. We understood the risk and the commitment, the level of covenant that it is death do you part. And we had already done that. Mm-hmm. And so we had enough information to go, wow, we're really compatible. We have a lot of fun together. Whatever we don't know, we'll figure out. And if we don't have the tools, we'll get them.
Yeah.
And so the dating process for us moved fairly quickly. It was accelerated a bit with the fact that my daughter had already committed to going to France for a foreign exchange program, and she wouldn't be able to come home for 10 months. So it was either we get married that summer or we wait an entire additional year beyond that. And it was one challenge. It was one challenge.
5 months and 1 week. There were a few moments in that time period where I'm like, am I making a stupid decision here? Like, God help me.
Yeah. And, part of what the other aspect was, we were like, okay, waiting the first time to have sex until you're married, right, was one challenge. But to do it after you've already been married 20 years with a healthy sex life, and then to find yourself single again, and having to manage your purity in a whole new, a whole nother level, we were like, let's just get married. We wanted to actually set and model for our kids that purity can be walked out no matter what age you are.
Mm-hmm. Amen. That's beautiful.
And so we dated, and while we were dating, we actually brought people into our relationship, into our home, to tell them about our story, and just to kind of the people that knew us, to get their feedback on how we were doing.
We brought in marriage mentors. We started working with a life coach. We invited friends in. And when I invited some of my friends to meet Michael and hear our story, I invited them with the intent to, after they heard our story, to actually speak in and ask us maybe challenging questions to see if there were things that we had missed, right? Were there any things they were seeing that we weren't seeing? And instead of asking us questions about us, they asked about them and about their situations with men and relationships. And so that was an indicator, after we spent an hour answering their questions, that, wow, in our community, there was a need for resources and equipping in regards to relationship.
Yeah, so I know. So a few months later, we did that actually 3 different times with 3 different groups, and we did end up getting married June 8th of 2018.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, some of the leaders of the church, small group leaders of the church, asked if we would do something around relationship. And so we started doing that. And for about a year, we did that. And then we were in Cancun, floating in the pool, probably had a drink in our hand. And we started talking. And I was in construction consulting, and Lisa was doing interior design work. And we're like, I don't know if it's wise to make life-changing decisions in a pool with a drink in your hand. But we're like, what if we just stopped construction and interior design and just focused on relationship coaching,
and
relationship classes? And we just dove. It took us we came back, and we kind of communicated to the people we were working with, like, hey, over the next month, we want to taper off what we're doing to dive into this relationship stuff and give it 6 months to see how it worked out. And it was like within a week, all of our resources dried up. All of our work dried up in 1 week. And we're like, oh, well, God, thank you. You must want us to do this because you made it really easy.
Yeah. And in fact, it was the very first. It was actually in our home. It was a life group, but we structured it like a class where we created the curriculum out of our experience, the topics that people had asked about. We created homework assignments around things that the Lord had us do in our single season. And Kate was actually in that very first class.
Yes.
At the beginning, you mentioned our mutual friend Kate, and she was in that class. And she was actually the first person that we coached.
Yeah, she had met someone
who was in South Africa.
And so we actually did some coaching with her. And that was kind of fun. But the cool thing, like every single class we created around some major life lesson that we learned. Like we didn't go to books, we didn't go to outside sources for this material. We looked at our own lives and what did we learn that helped in relationship? What did we learn that helped in preparing for marriage? And even the homework assignments were different things that we did. And it's just, I mean, even in construction, when I'd be building a high-end home, there's a lot of decisions. And that's a lot of money. And couples had a lot of pressure. And I actually spent a lot of time coaching couples to keep their marriage together. So what I used to do is I used to build homes for income and give free coaching away. And now I charge for coaching and I don't build homes anymore. And I actually found out there's actually more money.
You're building homes in a different way. You're building homes in a different way.
I am. And there's more money in building the physical home than there is in coaching the marriage at this point. But, we're working on it. We're still working on it.
Is so worth it.
Oh, yes.
We've had well over 400 people take our class. We've had 30 alumni get married since May of 2020. We have 5 more alumni that are engaged right now. A couple babies from those marriages. It's just so fun to see them
We've
thriving.
gotten to perform a few of those marriages.
Yeah.
Like I'm a contractor. I'm an architect. I'm a designer. The first wedding we officiated, I'm standing up there just laughing to myself like, how did I get here? And it was the most incredible view of a wedding to be standing right there by the groom when he sees the bride coming down the aisle. And amazing. Yeah.
That's really cool.
So
that's kind of how we got here.
That's a more than rough draft of our story, but
that's great. Yeah, I love how I like your story. You brought people along the way with you, and especially towards the end there, and you were looking for input into your lives, but really the frequently asked questions that you guys get asked were the things that actually basically snowballed into the ministry that you have now. And it's very interesting that, those people that God had in your life, they saw something in you that they wanted. And that's, for me, that's what this podcast is about. Like, I want to learn from other people's experience. And that's why whenever you were sharing this story the other night on that Zoom seminar, I was like, man, they've got a lot to share. They've got a lot that it's not just book knowledge, but it's experiential, which really, for me, that goes a lot deeper. Cause I learned from the school of hard knocks. I got to be hands-on. I got to be able to do that. Learning from a book has not been the easiest thing for me, but if you let me tinker with things and try to figure it out, I'm very good with my hands in that way. And so, to have somebody else's experience, how you've fallen and you've gotten back up and how you've gone through some difficult seasons, that's just so much more valuable than just reading it from somebody else's book and trying to apply that to a small group. Thank you guys so much for putting that together and being sensitive to the Holy Spirit. Yeah.
You're welcome. And, we don't, between the two of us, we don't even have the most dating experience, right? And we don't claim to be experts. Our heart is, we also at the same time over the last 4 years have been on a journey of personal development and emotional healing as well. And so our heart is to take whatever tools that we've learned and turn around and pass them off to somebody else, right? Yeah. It's like, this is just some things we found that worked for us. This is some general wisdom. This is kind of some things that the Bible speaks into. And here you go. You can shelf it. You can eat the meat, spit out the bones. It's up to you. But most people who have applied these things have really found value for them in terms of, we've seen a lot of people get a lot of inner healing, and we've helped lower the stakes. That's part of our heart, is to shift culture in terms of lowering the stakes of dating. And we are starting with dating within the church environment initially.
Yeah. And, probably the thing that I don't know that I find it the most appealing. It's a little humbling at times, but like it's almost inevitable. We teach one of the 10 weeks on conflict resolution. And it's inevitable. We'll get up that morning sometime during the day. Some minor relational explosion will happen.
It's kind of like getting in a fight on your way to church on Sunday. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah. And what we discovered, I can remember the first time we did this, we're in a session teaching, and we'd had some conflict that morning. And someone asked, well, how do you resolve that kind of conflict? Because we were theoretically talking about an old conflict.
Yeah.
And Lisa chimed in and she's like, well, this morning. And I'm like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
We're opening that can of worms right now.
Because life, we're adults with 6 kids. Like, we don't have time to process everything right away. Sometimes it's a day or two later. So I'm looking over at Lisa, and she just brought up this can of worms that we had just opened that morning. And I'm like, and everyone, and you could just feel the oxygen leave the room. Everyone in the room realized that we had a significant conflict that morning, and it wasn't resolved yet. And so everyone's like, and they grab their chairs, they clutch the person next to them.
And they're like, well, what do you do? I'm like, I don't know. Let's find out.
So we let them in right there.
Totally.
Yeah. So we literally brought up the details of what had happened, and it was still raw for both of us. And we talked through, and and you could see there were some people, I mean, based on if their parents didn't do conflict well, you could see the terror in their eyes. Even the ones that did have good parenting skills they learned, even then they were like, oh, this is delicate territory here.
But we have a real high value and commitment to vulnerability. And so that's something that we want to show up authentic. Trying to portray a picture of perfect people and perfect marriage actually isn't going to help people.
It's not us.
Right. What's really going to be valuable is if you can process authenticity and vulnerability and let people in on that. And then to show where you make mistakes, acknowledge them, admit them, and how do you clean it up? Right? How do you actually repair, restore? That, if you can explain the process to people, how you get there, that's so much more valuable than showing them a before and an after picture, right?
Yeah.
We live in a world where everything looks glossy and perfect and filtered. And so,
Instagram,
totally. And our heart is to go, no, this is reality, but there's so much hope because you can learn the tools. There's so much hope because you can get the healing. Right? There's so much hope because God is for you.
Yeah. I love what you said earlier, Lisa, that, as you guys were coming together, speaking about tools, you said, you were committed to this relationship already. And you said, if we don't have the tools, we'll go get them.
Yeah.
And I just love that mentality. And I think so many people just think if this doesn't work and it's not easy, then it must not be meant to be. But you have this mentality that we're going to go get the tools that we need to make this thing work.
Yeah.
And the way that you just explained that you bared your souls to a group of people that you were bringing along the way in their journeys, like you just gave them not just the tools, but like how to use it and how to really apply that to their situations too. So I love that mentality. That's really inspiring.
Michael introduced me to a friend of his who's a life consultant, and we started seeing her when we were dating, not even engaged.
Every week.
And we saw her every week for a year. And since then, we still have seen her every other week.
3 years.
And so there is this myth or this idea that getting help, whether it's therapy, counseling, coaching, whatever style you get, that you do it if something's wrong. And instead of no, we do it for maintenance because we weren't content to have a great marriage. We wanted an extraordinary marriage, right? We wanted a marriage that would actually inspire our 6 kids and thousands of other people. So in order to have something different, you have to literally do something different and you have to be intentional. And so we have to model that first before we have any right to teach that to our students. But it is possible.
Right.
Yeah. Everything of value is outside the comfort zone. Bringing other people in is uncomfortable. And Wow, you first off, the humility that you have to step into to invite other people into your relationship opens you up to learn. And a third person just has the capacity to see things that you're not able to see. It's been so valuable for us. Yeah.
That's so true.
What I love about your podcast, John, is that the idea of being on the road right along the way, that God meets you in your story, right? Mm-hmm. And I mentioned earlier that conversation I had with my first husband the day before he died. I had no clue, right, that was coming. And I had talked about how do I get from point A to point B? And I knew I wasn't supposed to strive, and that I said, maybe it was going to be 2 more years of training or a chance meeting with somebody. And I just want to bring that full circle, because what I said actually came true. It was 2 years of training. I did 2 years of ministry school, and it was a chance meeting with somebody, Michael.
Wow.
And it's just been really cool to see God's hand in our lives, that what we want our story to release to people is hope and redemption. We believe that God has a beautiful redemption story for every single person if they're willing to trust him and put their hand in his and walk with him, that he'll lead you into redemption. One of the best moments for me was about a day or so after we got married. We took a family photo at the wedding, and we got an edited copy really quick. And our oldest son, which is Michael's, he posted it on his Instagram, and he said, "My family is finally whole again." Wow. It wasn't just redemption for Michael and I. It was redemption for our 6 kids who all have lost a parent, who all felt loss and grief. And to be able to step in as a family on the same playing field and to experience redemption, and what does it look like to have a beautiful blended family and to do life really well together.
Yeah. And I definitely want to hear more about that before I get to my normal along the way question. How have your 6 kids gotten along together? Because there could be a lot of issues with that.
Well, so when we got married, all 8 of us were living in the house that first year. And so the story starts.
Months.
Well, yeah. But so several months before we got married, I would have regular family times every morning between 6 and 7 with my kids. And so we would come over and started having some family times before we got married, months before.
Mm-hmm. And then I went on a ministry trip and a mission trip, and those were like 10, 12-day trips. So he came and stayed in the house with his kids to also kind of test out like what were the dynamics.
Yeah. But probably one of the most important things we did during that time is we just sat down and just said, hey, we are thinking about getting married. What are the prices and the benefits for each person? And it's a 4-bedroom house, and there's 8 people. So that means there's going to be 2 people in every bedroom. And and there were only 2 daughters, so they were going to be together. And the 4 boys had a little flexibility because Lisa had 1 and I had 3, so there's a little flexibility to figure that out. But we just had the kids just kind of sit down and have a little like a mastermind session around, okay, what are the benefits? Of course, at first they went to all the benefits. Oh, we can have pool parties and all the fun stuff that they could do, and hiking. But then they sat down like, oh, especially the girls.
They're the same age, and they were acquaintances at school, but very different personalities. And they both were used to rooming by themselves, and now they were going to get to room together.
And one is a minimalist, and the other
is creative and likes it dark and a little messy, and a lot of stuff surrounding her for safety.
Yeah, and so there were some pretty polar opposite differences between the 2 girls, and they actually did a great job of owning those differences a month or so before we got married. And so we just opened up the conversation, and they talked through maybe some ways they could honor each other so that they could work together better in the same room. And the beautiful thing was, because we opened the conversation up before we got married, that once we got married and they ended up living together, all of the kids, a week down the road, a month down the road, they were able to raise their hand in family time and just say, hey, they don't have to raise their hand in family time, but they're like, hey, some of the things that I thought would work out well aren't working out so well. And the conversation had already been started before we got married. So they just, instead of conflict, instead of tension, they were able to just, hey, let's talk, let's bring that back up again and let's talk about it and renegotiate what it might look like so we can live together in harmony.
It certainly helped that Michael and I both had very similar styles in how we raised our kids. And his kids had all gotten along together. My two had gotten along with each other. So when all 6 kids are together, they get along really well. Yeah. And I cannot think of one fight that any of them have had. And so, and I also believe that the Lord just gave our family a special grace for the blending. Not to say there haven't been a few bumps and things that we have to work through, but a special grace to actually blend and to connect. And we've been intentional. And just to be real honest, it's been a little easier that, like some blended families, there's some parent sharing and children are doing split custody and they're in and out of the home and different things. We don't have that. We never had that dynamic. Sure. Yeah. So we're all in. So that's the best way to say it. But we feel really blessed to have the connection that we do and the effort that everybody has made into connecting. Yeah, the same effort we put into our marriage, we've also put into the relationship with our kids. And it's not perfect. They'll let you know if you ask them, and we've even asked them. But and they've let us know the things that we're not doing so good. And so we take notes, we take feedback. But we're really intentional with them, and they're even intentional with each other to stay connected. So it's just been beautiful to see the inheritance or the legacy that we're creating.
That's awesome. Yeah. As you guys were talking about just how you brought the families together, I love how everybody sat down and they talked about it. You really showed honor and respect, and you demonstrated that. So even later on, as things weren't working, they already had that ability to be able to, hey, I don't agree with this, or, this is what's going on. But it sounded like they were still honoring and respecting everybody else in the situation, but looking for the solution rather than, I just want it my way. At least that's how you guys portrayed it in here. So I think that's what happened. Yeah. A safe place was already created for them to know that they were valued and that it was okay for them to share their heart. That's cool. Yeah.
I think, and this happens in every relationship, but with the kids, we just took right and wrong and tossed it out. Like that tree of good and evil shows up everywhere. I mean, I know there's sin and you don't sin, but we like to, like society, politics today, we like to couch everything in right or wrong. And differences, even personality differences. We see that a lot with couples that we coach. So them just not looking at it as right or wrong, just they're different. Our 2 daughters have 2 different personalities and they both have strengths. And it was just beautiful to watch them choose each other and to really extend. And so for one to go, I could relax a little. I don't need to be so uptight about things being a certain way. And the other one's like, and I could probably, I love you. I could probably keep my stuff a little neater, right? They did it out of love. And that is so beautiful because that's what we hope for every couple that, we do premarital with, that they will actually choose out of love, not out of rules, not out of because they have to or ultimatums, but out of love, that we actually extend ourselves to each other. Yeah. Build bridges.
Man. Guys, as we're coming to a close here, I got to ask my theme questions here, my along the way questions. Just like the disciples were walking on the road to Emmaus, here comes Jesus and they just didn't realize that it was him until they sit down at the table. Jesus blesses the food, breaks the bread. Their eyes are opened, and then poof, he's gone. In Luke 24:32, they turn to each other and say, weren't our hearts burning within us along the way as he was revealing the scriptures with us? I like to ask the question, when you look back at your life now, You've come a long way, but where do you look now and see Jesus that you didn't see in the moment? At least I'll start with you.
Well, I have to say that in the season of losing Chris and the trauma, just how faithful God was. It became at about 6 weeks after I really could start to see, I was like, wow, not only did God know this would happen, right? And it wasn't his will for Chris's life, but in that, he really showed me a lot of love. I really can see how he went before me and he prepared. He put certain things in my heart to hold on to. He put dreams in there. He paved the way in terms of like, he financially set me up so I would be okay, me and the kids. Like, I can just really see the kindness of God in that. And just, it was a tough road to walk, but he was there. He was walking with me and he went before me and he made sure that everything was there that I was going to need. And he led me to a place and to a community where I would be covered, where I felt loved, where I belonged, and where I'd be equipped to get the tools I needed. And so I'm just so thankful for that. I would say that definitely I've seen him there. And the other thing is in meeting Michael. The kindness of God to bless me with somebody who is so amazing, right? He's not perfect, but I believe he's perfect for me. And I just felt so loved by God that he would just give me somebody who is such a gift. And I'm just blown away by the kindness of God in that. I've never felt more loved. And I thought these kind of relationships were only for people who were more qualified, more beautiful, more anointed, more talented, more gifted, more whatever. I thought the goodness of God was for those people, but not for me. And to experience it, and it's real, and it's work, but it's authentic, and to experience that, I feel so loved for God. But I also, say to you and to your listeners, if he can do it for me and Michael, he can do it for you, because he doesn't love us anymore. We're more qualified, no more special, no more anything than anybody else. And so if God can do it for us, he can do it for you.
Amen. Amen. And my follow-up question for that, Lisa, and then we'll come to you, Michael. Lisa, if you could go back in time, visit yourself on your own timeline at any point in your life, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself, and what's going on in your life that you would want to receive that advice?
I was probably about 24 years old, and I could hear the voice of the Lord saying, I want you to come deeper with me. And I didn't know what that meant. I thought in a very legalistic way that meant I have to spend so much time a day reading in the Bible and so much time a day praying, and like these list of to-dos to have this relationship with God. And it felt too much. I didn't feel like I could do that. It felt so, even though I was a believer and I went to church every week, I didn't pursue the presence of God because I didn't know how to get there. And so if I could go back to that 24-year-old girl and to say, just dive in and to really seek the presence in the heart of God. And for me, worship is a huge way I connect with God. I know some people it's nature, other people it's in contemplative journaling and other things. But for me, it's through worship. And I'm really thankful that eventually God led me to that place. I just wish I would have experienced the more of God sooner, because it's so rich. It's so good. My life has been transformed. Yeah.
Wow.
God's faithful.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
That's beautiful. Michael, what about you? Where do you look back and you see Jesus now that you didn't see in those moments?
There's a whole lot of small steps in that journey, but I think probably one of the biggest steps, I was a few months into grieving Deborah's passing, and I was at church Sunday morning, and the song hadn't come out yet, but they led the song King of My Heart. And it got to the bridge in that song where he's never going to let me down. And I got so angry. There was a lady in Florida that I could call that had been diagnosed with 4th-stage breast cancer. And when I prayed for her, she had been completely healed. And that was before my wife contracted breast cancer and Deborah died. In that moment, it was before the song came out, so I actually went on Bethel TV, and sorry guys, I ripped the song off of Bethel TV, put it on iTunes, and I listened to that song for over 36 hours straight.
Wow.
Because I knew I wanted to listen to that song until I could worship God to it. And it took 36 hours before I could do that. I honestly, that night, I did not sleep all night long. I kept listening to that song on repeat. I don't know how many thousand times, hundreds of times I listened to that song. I had it memorized by the end. But I got to the point, the last few hours, I could sing the whole song. And I was singing it with all my might, just yelling it out in the house. I gave my kids a grid for what was going on, but I got to the point where I could sing that song and be completely sold out. Yes. I asked God, God, why did this lady survive and why did my wife die? And he hasn't answered that question. And he might one day, or he might not. And I'm okay. Going through that process, listening to King of My Heart, I was able to reconcile, I am okay with whatever happens. I influence God. I don't control God, but I influence God. And I can't explain why that happened, because I know God's desire is to see her healed. It was never God's desire to see her die of cancer. And so there's this tension of unanswered questions. And I know that he's never going to let me down. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, you got me choking up here, Michael. I mean, that's worshiping with that song until you can really worship it with it. That's such a challenge, because there's so many times we're just singing songs that we don't even know what it means. But to really worship with something that you're like, God, I know this is the truth, but it doesn't feel like it right now. Exactly. It doesn't feel like it. I know it's the truth, but Lord, I believe, help my unbelief type of a thing. And you put that on repeat for 36 hours. That's remarkable. Yeah. I mean, that would be like torture, but you said, no, I'm getting through it.
I've never done anything like that since. Wow. But yes.
Wow.
And man, you mentioned, when could I go back? Oof.
Yeah.
I would, I'd probably go back to right before I got married. And
first or second time?
First time. First time. And to give that gift to me back then, I know back then it was all about what I did, what I thought. My identity came from my acceptance and approval from my performance. That was my entire grid for life. And I'd been born a Christian, and I wanted to be a Christian, and everything I did was to please God and to please people around me. That was my whole grid for life. And to be able to go back, and I don't even know what I would say, but if I could just give that experience to myself, I think I was in my early 20s at that point, and to have that experience and to be able to absorb that experience would have changed everything. Yeah, and I don't even know the words I could have said to give that experience. Just, you have to experience it. And to have had that experience 20 years earlier, 25 years earlier, would have been pure gold.
Wow. Guys, there's so many different things that we've covered, so many different themes, but I've definitely seen how Jesus has been walking with you this whole time. And I'm going to ask you guys in just a moment to just release a prayer or a blessing over the people that are listening. Because I feel like that is such an important thing that I could ask you guys to do. And, Lisa, as you said something earlier, I wrote it down because you said that, you were doing this online dating thing, and you felt like the Lord say, if you want this, I'll bless it, but I have better for you. So many times we just settle for what we want because it's right there, and we're not willing to wait for the best thing that God has for us. That missing piece of the puzzle, that it just feels like this, I don't know where this piece goes, but I'm going to trust that God has the right place for it. Could you guys just release a prayer and a blessing for people that are listening that might be struggling with that same type of a situation, or any other way that God might be leading you guys as well?
Yeah, God. Yeah, we just come before you and we just thank you for the goodness of who you are and how faithful you are. And so for every single listener out there, God, I pray that they would feel your presence, that they would have a fresh encounter of you, of the authenticity of who you are, that you are not a distant God, but you are a near God, and you're a really good dad who loves them. God, I pray for a fresh revelation of that for each person. And God, I pray that you would walk and lead them through doing the hard things today so that they can have the best things tomorrow. God, I pray that you would give them clarity of mind and of spirit to make beautiful choices that would serve them, that would help them to continue to grow and to become the person that you've created them to be. God, I pray that you would step each person into a life of abundance, that they would experience abundance in every single area, God, in their relationships, their finances, their career, and their family. God, that you would give them the ability to trust you. God, that they would see your faithfulness as a thread throughout their life, God, that they would be able to recognize you in all the different seasons, and that you are faithful to be faithful, so that they would have the ability to trust you for the next thing. And as John said, God, thank you for the faith we have, but we ask for more, right? And so, God, we thank you for the trust we have, and we ask for more. God, we ask you to give us trust so that we can follow you in the path that you lead us.
Yeah, Papa. God, I just ask that for every person listening, they would be able to lay down their preconceptions of you, preconceptions of who they are, and that, God, they could see you clearly the way you want to be seen, the way you want to show up with us. God, that we could see you as friend. You are creator. You are God. You are master of the universe and your father, your friend. You have opened your heart up to us. God, I ask that you would take each one of us by the hand, and I love adventure, God. Just take us up to the edge of your heart. And God, dive in deep with us, that we could experience your love, the blood flowing through your veins, God, that our thoughts, we would share them freely with your thoughts, and our dreams, we would share them freely with you. And God, that we would realize that life isn't something that we're doing for you to approve of, but life is something that we're doing with you to celebrate the connection together. God, just like Adam and you in the garden walking together, God, my heart's desire and my heart's desire for each person on this call is to be able to experience holding your hand, walking together, telling their greatest dreams, their greatest fears, and receiving your warm friendship, advice, love, contribution. God, we invite you in. We welcome you into our lives. We give you influence over every area. God, thank you. Amen.
Amen. Yeah. And for all your listeners, we just release that hope to them.
Yes.
That God has a beautiful redemptive story for them. It's not going to look the same as ours. It's going to be unique to them, but God has a beautiful redemptive plan for each one.
Yes.
Amen.
Broken
Amen.
pieces. The beauty of our story is made up of the most broken pieces. So don't take that discouragement and give it to God and watch what he does with it.
Amen. Amen. That reminds me of the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is the pots or the bowls that were beautiful in their original form that have been broken and smashed, but those joints have been repaired. Those breaks have been repaired with gold, and it becomes even more valuable and even more beautiful. Mm-hmm. And that's what God has done with you guys. And I just want to bless you guys with that you have become even more valuable because you've allowed God to put that gold and fuse you guys back together. You guys, I just want to give people the opportunity to connect with you. So if you could talk about your website and how people can get a hold of you. I know we've got your coaching and the dating discovery, but here's your opportunity for a little bit of a commercial here.
Yeah. So we started with Kunz Coaching, and we do a lot of relationship coaching, mostly with singles, but we certainly do premarital coaching for people that are engaged. And then we do a fair bit, because when this happens, they get married and then they come back, and we've done a fair bit of marriage coaching as well. And
so kunzcoaching.com is a great way to get a hold of us. There's an email address and our phone number's on there.
Yeah, KUNZ.
Yes, KUNZ.com. And then if you're single and you're interested in the course that we teach, it's a 10-week long interactive course that is designed to take you on a journey of discovering your heart, going after some healing, stepping into some new mindsets around dating and how some things you can implement practically now. That is at our website, thedatingdiscovery.com. And we teach it 4 times a year because it's a 10-week course.
Yeah, we discovered that
Very cool.
we tend to attract who we are. And so the course is really based around discovering who am I, and most of it's really beautiful and we just don't know. And then there's some bits and pieces here and there that can use some cleaning up and some refining. And it's so much fun to watch people go through the course and discover who they are, get some healing, and walk out powerfully.
Amen. I love that. Discover who they are, get some healing, and walk out powerfully. That's an awesome, awesome goal.
Yeah. So that way they're ready when the right person comes along, and that they're going to choose out of a place of wholeness, not lack, and to set them up for a beautiful marriage.
Out of abundance.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Michael and Lisa, thank you guys so much for sharing your stories and just allowing me to join you along your way.
John, thank you so much. This has been an honor.
Yes.
I love it.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mike and Lisa Kunz. If you're interested in finding out more of their information and taking your own dating discovery, I'll be providing all of that information in the show notes. Thank you for listening to Along the Way. If you've enjoyed joining me along my way, please share this with a friend who you think will be encouraged by this podcast. Also, please rate and review Along the Way on iTunes. That helps more people discover Along the Way. And subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and through my website, alongtheway.media. If you want to help support me in this podcast, I also have a Patreon page. The link to become a supporter is in my show notes. I hope that you've enjoyed this part of my journey, and may you realize when Jesus is walking with you along your way. Along the Way is honored to be part of the Charisma Podcast Network. You can find tons of spirit-filled content from their vast catalog of podcasts, including my Monday through Friday news stories for the Charisma News Podcast. Go to cpnshows.com to see the full list and latest episodes.